The note was 3 sentences. I had written it on a piece of stationery I had bought 11 years ago at a small paper store in Vermont and had never used because my husband had said, when he saw it on the counter the day I bought it home, "Pearl, what on earth did you spend money on that for? You do not write letters." I had put the stationery in a drawer that day. I had taken it out the morning I left, which was a Wednesday in September, 2 days after my 64th birthday. I wrote the note at the kitchen table with the same pen I had been using to write the grocery list for 32 years. The note said, "Marcus, I have left a casserole in the refrigerator. I am not coming back. Please do not call my sister. Pearl." I set the note on the counter under the salt shaker because the back door tended to blow open when the AC kicked on, and I did not want the note to go anywhere. I picked up my purse. I picked up the small overnight bag I had packed the night before. I walked out the front door at 8:14 in the morning. I locked it behind me with the key I had been carrying since 1991. I dropped the key into the small ceramic pot of geraniums on the porch because I would not be needing it anymore. I got into my car. I drove to my sister Susannah's house in Bar Harbor, Maine. I arrived at 7:42 that evening. Susannah was on the porch with a glass of white wine and a sweater the color of butter. She did not ask me anything. She just held the door open. I walked in. I sat down. I took off my shoes. Marcus called Susannah's house at 9:03 that night. I had asked her not to answer. She did not. I have not spoken to my husband since. Welcome back to Broken Relations Stories. If you are new here, this channel is for the women who finally stopped explaining themselves, the women who spent 4 decades being patient and discovered on a Wednesday morning in September that they did not have to spend a 5th one. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let me take you back to 1992, when I was 30 years old and my future husband, who I had been dating for 14 months, asked me a question over dinner that I should have heard the answer to before I said yes. My name is Pearl Tisdale. I am 64 years old. I was married for 32 years to a man named Marcus Tisdale. Marcus is 67. He is a retired civil engineer. He spent 39 years at a regional firm in a small city in central Pennsylvania, designing bridges and overpasses for the State Department of Transportation. He retired in 2022. We had 2 children, a son named Theodore, who is 28 and lives in Seattle, and a daughter named Eleanor, who is 31 and lives in Chicago. Both of them are doing well. Both of them call me on Sundays. Both of them, when I told them what I was doing, said the same thing within a day of each other. They said, "Mom, we have been waiting for this. We love you. Whatever you need, we are here." I want to say at the start of this story that my children are not the reason I stayed. I want to be clear about that because I have heard women tell their stories who say they stayed for the children, and I want to say that I did not. I stayed because I had been raised to stay. I stayed because my mother had stayed, and her mother had stayed, and the women in my family had been staying for as long as anyone could remember. I stayed because I did not know until I was 62 years old that staying was a choice I was making every single morning when I poured my husband his coffee. I had thought it was the weather. I had thought it was the air. I had thought it was the ground I was standing on. It was not. It was a choice. I had been making it for so long that I had forgotten it was mine to make. The question Marcus asked me in 1992 was about a job offer I had gotten. I was 30 years old. I was an associate editor at a small publishing house in Philadelphia. I had been there for 4 years. I had been doing well. I had been offered a senior position at a bigger house in New York. The position would have required me to move to the city. Marcus and I had been dating for 14 months. He was 32. He was already an engineer at his firm in Pennsylvania, in the small city where his family had lived for 3 generations. I had told him about the job offer at dinner at a restaurant we both liked. I had been excited. He had listened. When I was done, he had said, "Pearl, I am not going to move to New York. I have my family here. My career is here. I am going to be candid with you. If we are going to be serious, you need to decide whether you are a New York person or a Pennsylvania person. I cannot wait while you figure it out." I should have heard that sentence for what it was. I did not. I was 30 years old. I had been in love with him for 14 months. I had been the daughter of a mother who had spent her life saying yes to my father, and I had not yet built the muscle of saying no to a man who was asking me to make myself smaller. I turned down the job. I moved to Pennsylvania 6 months later. We got married the year after that, in 1993. I took an editing job at a small academic press in Marcus's small city. I stayed at that press for 27 years. I edited journals on civil engineering, which, I will admit, had a particular irony to it. I made, at the end of those 27 years, just under $52,000 a year. Marcus, in the same year, made $187,000. He retired with a pension. I did not have a pension. I had a retirement account I had funded out of my own salary, which had grown to a respectable but modest sum, and which I had kept in my own name because somewhere in me, a part of me I had not let myself examine, had wanted to know that something in my life was mine. That account, when I left, was worth $314,000. I am telling you this because the money mattered. The money always matters. Anyone who tells you it does not is a person who has never had to figure out how to leave. Marcus was not a bad man. I want to say that too. He did not drink. He did not raise his hand. He went to work every day for 39 years. He took the kids to soccer practice. He paid the mortgage. He filed our taxes. He was, by every external measure available to the people who knew us, a good husband. What he was not, in the privacy of our home, was curious about me. He had decided sometime in the early years that I was the kind of woman who would manage the household, and he had decided this with such confidence that I had eventually decided it too. He did not ask me about my work. He did not ask me about my friends. He did not ask me in 32 years what I had wanted to be when I was 20. He did not know when I left that I had once wanted to be a novelist. I had written 3 chapters of a novel between 1988 and 1991, before we had met, and I had not told him about them because he had laughed once at a colleague's wife who had, quote-unquote, tried to be a writer. And I had filed his laughter away, and the 3 chapters had stayed in a manila folder in the bottom of a filing cabinet for 32 years. They are still there. I have not gone back to get them. I will, eventually. I am not in a hurry. I want to tell you about the kind of marriage we had, because I think there are women listening to this who are in marriages like mine and who do not yet have language for what is happening to them. We had what most people would have called a fine marriage. We took family vacations. We had Sunday dinners. We had a circle of friends, mostly his colleagues and their wives, who we saw every 6 weeks at someone's house for a barbecue. Marcus was funny at parties. Marcus was generous at Christmas. Marcus remembered my birthday every single year and bought me a card and a small piece of jewelry, usually something he had asked his secretary to pick out at a department store at the mall. I had a closet full of small pieces of jewelry that had been picked out by Marcus's secretary, who I had never met. I do not say any of this to make him into a villain. He was not a villain. He was a man who had grown up with a mother who had taught him that men provided and women managed, and who had spent his entire adult life in a marriage that had confirmed that lesson without ever asking him to question it. He had not had the opportunity to become a different kind of man. I had not asked him to. I had been the wife who kept the lesson going. It had taken me 32 years to understand that I was a co-author of my own marriage, and that the marriage I had been complaining about quietly to myself for 3 decades was a marriage I had been helping to build, 1 cup of coffee at a time, every single morning of those decades. The children noticed before I did. They had noticed for years. Eleanor had said to me in 2018, when she had been 26 and home for Christmas, after Marcus had dismissed an idea I had floated at the dinner table about taking a trip to Ireland for our 25th anniversary. "Mom, why do you let him do that?" I had said, "Do what, sweetheart?" She had said, "Mom, you know what." I had said, "Eleanor, it is just the way your father is. He does not mean anything by it." Eleanor had looked at me for a long second. She had said, "Mom, I love you. I am not going to argue with you about this, but I want you to know that I see it." She had not brought it up again. Theodore, 2 years later in 2020, had said something similar after his college graduation, when Marcus had cut him off mid-sentence about a job offer Theodore had been excited about. Theodore had said in the car on the way home from dinner, just me and him, "Mom, Dad has not heard me speak for 5 minutes without interrupting since I was 11. Does he do that to you too?" I had said, "Theodore, your father loves you. He is just sometimes distracted." Theodore had looked out the window. He had said, "Okay, Mom." He had not asked again. My children had been telling me what they were seeing for years. I had been deflecting them with the practiced ease of a woman who had been deflecting herself for longer. They had been kind. They had stopped pressing. They had waited. They had been waiting for me to be ready. The day I finally was ready, they had both said, within a day of each other, the same sentence. "We have been waiting for this. We love you. Whatever you need, we are here." They had been carrying their own knowledge of my marriage for a long time. I had not protected them from it. I had only protected myself from having to act on it. I have apologized to both of them in long letters I sent in January from Susannah's house for the years they had spent watching me be smaller than I needed to be. They had both written back. They had both said in their own ways, "Mom, you do not owe us an apology. We knew you would get here. We are just glad you did." The thing that happened, the specific thing that finally turned the key, was small. It was so small, I am almost embarrassed to tell you. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 6 months before I left. Marcus and I had been in the kitchen. I had been peeling an apple. I had been thinking about a poem I had read that morning in a magazine my friend Glenda had given me, by a poet I had never heard of, whose name was Lucille Clifton, and whose lines had been moving around in my chest all morning, the way good poems move around when they are looking for the right corner to rest in. I had said out loud to Marcus, who had been reading the newspaper at the table, "Marcus, there is a poem I read this morning that I have been thinking about. May I read it to you?" Marcus had not looked up from his paper. He had said, "Pearl, I am reading. Read it to me later." I had said, "Okay." I had finished peeling the apple. I had cut it into slices. I had put the slices on a plate. I had set the plate on the table next to Marcus. I had walked into the living room. I had sat down on the couch. I had looked out the window at the spring afternoon. I had thought very clearly 3 words I had not let myself think before. He will not. He will never. He had been my husband for 31 years, and he was not going to ask me about the poem. Not later, not ever. He had not asked me about anything that was happening inside me in 31 years, and it was not going to start now. I had sat on that couch for 47 minutes without moving. I had not cried. I had only sat. When I had finally stood up, I had walked into the kitchen and I had read the poem to myself out loud, alone, while Marcus had been in the other room. The poem had been called, "Won't You Celebrate With Me?" The last lines had been, "Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." I had read those lines into my own quiet kitchen. I had heard them. I had understood for the first time in my life what they were about. They were about me. I want to pause here for a second. If you have ever had a small moment in your own kitchen that you knew, somewhere in your body, was the moment a long thing ended, then you know what I am describing. If this is hitting close, drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not. We are getting to the part where I actually left. I did not leave that day. I want to be honest about that. I sat on that knowledge for 6 months. I went to bed that night next to Marcus. I made breakfast in the morning. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I watched the news with him. I went to sleep. I did everything I had been doing for 31 years with the small new knowledge in my chest that I was going to leave and that the leaving was no longer a question, only a question of when and how. I called my sister Susannah at the end of March. Susannah is 4 years younger than me. She had been divorced for 11 years from a man named Hollis, who had been a worse husband than Marcus by a substantial margin. Susannah had moved to Maine the year after her divorce. She had bought a small house in Bar Harbor with a porch and a vegetable garden and a view of the water. She had remarried in 2019 to a man named Owen, who was a retired marine biologist and who, in the 5 years I had known him, had asked me more questions about my life than Marcus had asked in 32. I called Susannah from my office at the Academic Press. I had retired from the press in 2021 after 27 years, but I had kept a part-time consulting arrangement with them that allowed me to keep an office. I closed the door of the office. I called her. I said, "Suze, I am going to leave Marcus. I do not know when, but I wanted you to know." There was a pause. Then Susannah said, "Pearl, I have been waiting for this call for 11 years. Tell me what you need." I said, "I do not know yet." She said, "Pearl, here is what I am going to do. I am going to set up the guest room. I am going to clear out the dresser. I am going to put fresh sheets on the bed. The room is going to be ready for you whenever you decide. If it is tomorrow, it is ready tomorrow. If it is 2 years from now, it is ready 2 years from now. I am not going to ask. I am just going to keep the room ready. Do you understand?" I said yes. She said, "Pearl, one more thing. Are you in danger?" I said no. She said, "Okay, then take your time. Take the time you need to take. I love you. Drive carefully when you come." I took 6 months. During those 6 months, I did what Marcus would have called, if he had ever asked, nothing. I went to work. I made dinner. I read books. I had coffee with Glenda on Wednesdays. What I was actually doing was preparing. I want to tell you what that preparation looked like, because if you are a woman of a certain age who is listening to this and thinking that the time for leaving has passed, I want you to hear me say that it has not. Here is what I did. I called an attorney. Her name was Marjorie Whitfield. She was 71 years old. She had been a family law attorney for 44 years. She had been recommended to me by Glenda, whose sister had used her years earlier. I met with Marjorie at her office on a Thursday morning in April. I told her my situation. I told her about the marriage. I told her about my retirement account, about the house, about Marcus's pension. Marjorie walked me through what I was entitled to under Pennsylvania law. The house, which Marcus and I had owned outright since 2018, would be a marital asset. Marcus's pension would be a marital asset, even though it had been earned in his name. Half of his pension, payable to me for the rest of my life, would be mine. My retirement account would remain mine. The combined assets, divided fairly, would leave both of us with enough to live on comfortably. Marjorie said, "Pearl, I want you to understand something. You are not asking for anything you have not earned. You have been a contributing partner in this marriage for 32 years. The law sees you. The law sees your contribution. Anything Marcus tries to argue otherwise will not stand. We will handle this calmly. We will handle this through paperwork. You will not need to be in a courtroom. Most cases like yours, when they are managed correctly, never see the inside of a courtroom. Do you understand?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Good. When you are ready, you call me. I will file. We will be ready." I called Marjorie 6 months later on a Monday morning in September. I said, "Marjorie, I am ready. I am leaving Wednesday. I will be at my sister's by Wednesday evening. Please file Thursday morning." She said, "Pearl, I will. Take care of yourself." I said, "Thank you." I hung up. I want to tell you about those 6 months between meeting Marjorie and leaving. I want to tell you because someone listening to this is in those 6 months right now. The 6 months were quiet. The 6 months were ordinary. The 6 months were the most concentrated period of attention I have ever paid to my own life. I went to work. I made dinner. I had coffee with Glenda on Wednesdays. I did everything Marcus expected me to do, and while I was doing it, I was, quietly, slowly, putting myself together. I moved a small amount of money into a checking account in my name only, $300 a week, a number small enough not to trigger any attention. I opened a P.O. box at a different post office in a different town and forwarded my professional journals and a few subscriptions to it so that I had records of my own address that did not have to go through Marcus. I made copies of important documents and kept them in a safety deposit box at a bank Marcus had never been to. I drove to Maine twice during those 6 months, telling Marcus each time that I was visiting Susannah for a long weekend, which I was, but also that I was, on those weekends, walking through the neighborhoods of Bar Harbor with my sister, looking at small cottages, learning the bus routes, learning where the library was, learning where I would buy groceries, learning what my new life was going to feel like before I lived it. Susannah said to me on the second visit, "Pearl, you are doing what people do who survive these things. You are imagining your new life before you live it. It is going to make the actual leaving much easier. The imagining is the hardest part." She was right. By August, when I had been imagining for 5 months, the imagining had become so vivid that the actual leaving in September was almost ceremonial. I had been living in my head in the cottage that did not yet exist for months. When I finally walked into Susannah's house that Wednesday evening, it had felt like coming home to a place I had been to 1,000 times. The Wednesday morning I left was the most ordinary morning of my life. I want to tell you about it because I think people imagine that the morning a woman leaves a 32-year marriage is a dramatic morning. It was not. It was Wednesday. Marcus came down at 7:15. I had made his coffee. I had made his oatmeal. I had set out the cinnamon and the brown sugar and the small pitcher of cream the way I had set them out for 32 years. He had eaten. He had read the paper. He had said, "Pearl, I am going to go run errands this morning. I need to pick up the dry cleaning and stop at the hardware store. Do you need anything?" I had said, "No, Marcus, thank you. I am fine." He had left at 7:50. He had taken our second car. I had stood in the kitchen for 14 minutes after he left. I had drunk a second cup of coffee. I had washed my mug. I had put it in the drying rack. I had gone upstairs. I had carried down the overnight bag I had packed 2 nights earlier and hidden in the back of my closet. I had taken the casserole I had made the previous day out of the refrigerator and moved it to a more visible shelf so Marcus would find it. I had written the note. I had set the note on the counter under the salt shaker. I had walked out. I had locked the door. I had dropped the key into the geraniums. I had driven away. The drive to Bar Harbor was 11 hours. I had brought a thermos of coffee. I had brought sandwiches in a small cooler. I had brought a CD of Joni Mitchell I had bought in 1976 and had been playing for 49 years. I had played Court and Spark twice, all the way through, before I crossed into Connecticut. I had cried somewhere on I-84 around 1 in the afternoon, not from grief, but from the particular shock of understanding that I had done the thing I had been afraid to do for 32 years, and that the doing of it had been, in the end, as simple as locking a door and turning a key in the ignition. I had been afraid of the wrong thing. I had been afraid of the leaving. The leaving had been easy. What had been hard was the staying. I had been doing the hard thing all along. Susannah was on the porch when I pulled in. Owen was inside making dinner. He had made a chowder. He had set a place for me at the table. He had not made a fuss. He had said when I came in, "Pearl, welcome. The chowder is almost ready. Susannah will show you where the guest room is. We will eat in 15 minutes. We are happy you are here." That was all. Susannah took me upstairs. The guest room was the room she had said it would be. There were fresh sheets on the bed. There was a small vase of late summer flowers on the dresser. There was a folded towel on the chair. There was a card on the pillow that said, "Pearl, you are home as long as you need to be. We love you, Sus and Owen." I sat on the edge of the bed. I cried for the second time that day. I washed my face. I went downstairs. I ate the chowder. I went to bed at 9:30. I slept until 7 in the morning for the first time in maybe a decade. Marcus called Susannah's house 6 times in the first 48 hours. Susannah did not pick up. Marjorie's letter arrived at Marcus's address on Friday morning, served by a process server she had retained the day before. The letter was, I am told, 4 pages long. It explained that I had filed for divorce. It explained that all communication regarding the divorce should go through Marjorie's office. It explained the schedule for the next steps. Marcus called Marjorie's office on Friday afternoon at 3:14. Marjorie's paralegal told me later that he had been agitated. He had said, "I want to speak to my wife. I do not understand what is happening." Marjorie's paralegal had said, "Mr. Tisdale, I understand you are upset. Your wife is not available. Please direct any communication to this office and we will respond as appropriate. I would also recommend you retain counsel of your own. Do you have an attorney?" Marcus had said, "No." The paralegal had said, "I would recommend you obtain one. I cannot recommend a specific attorney to you, but the County Bar Association has a referral service. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Tisdale." Marcus retained an attorney on Monday. The attorney's name was Frederick Holcomb. He was a younger man, in his early 40s, the kind of attorney who took cases without fully understanding the long story behind them. He filed a response on Marcus's behalf, alleging that I had, quote, "abandoned the marital home without cause and seeking the entirety of the marital assets." Marjorie had laughed when she had read his filing. She had said, "Pearl, Mr. Holcomb does not appear to have explained to his client what no-fault divorce means in Pennsylvania, or what abandonment does and does not mean. He will figure it out. The first filing is always the loudest one. Give him a month." She had been right. By the end of October, Mr. Holcomb had filed an amended response that was substantially more reasonable. He had clearly explained the law to his client. His client had clearly, painfully, slowly begun to understand that the marriage he had been in had not been the marriage he had thought he had been in, and that the woman he had been married to was not the woman he had assumed she was, and that the divorce he was now facing was not going to be the divorce of a wronged man, but the divorce of a man who had spent 32 years not asking his wife about a poem. Marcus called my cell phone on a Thursday in November. I had not blocked his number. I had thought when I left that I would block it. I had decided in the end not to, because I wanted to know if he would call and what he would say. He had not called for 2 months. I had been somewhat surprised. He called that Thursday at 11:14 in the morning. I had been on Susannah's porch reading. I had set the book down. I had looked at the phone. I had let it ring 3 times. I had answered. I had said, Marcus. He had said, Pearl, please, can we talk? I had said, Marcus, we can talk through our attorneys. That is what I would like. He had said, Pearl, I do not understand. I do not understand any of this. I have been a good husband. I have provided for our family. I have done everything you have asked. I had said, Marcus, do you remember the poem? There had been a long pause. He had said, Pearl, what poem? I had said, Marcus, that is the answer to your question. I had hung up. I had not been crying. I had not been angry. I had only been tired. He had not remembered the poem because he had never heard it. I had been right about him for 32 years. I had also been right about him on the porch in Bar Harbor with the phone in my hand. I had not needed to leave him to learn that I had been right. I had only needed to leave him to start living the life that being right had earned me. If you have ever wondered whether the man you are married to is going to be different when you ask him a hard question for the first time, and you have understood in the asking that he is not, then you know what that phone call felt like. Drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not. We are getting to the part that some of you are going to need. The settlement was finalized in March. It took 6 months. The negotiations were, by divorce standards, civilized. Mr. Holcomb came to understand his client's position. Marjorie, calm and patient and 71 years old and impossible to ruffle, walked the negotiations through to a fair outcome. We sold the house. We split the proceeds. I received half of Marcus's pension, payable monthly for the rest of my life, beginning the month the settlement was finalized. I kept my retirement account. I took the small antique writing desk that had been my grandmother's. I took the cedar chest that had held my mother's wedding dress. I took the small watercolor of a barn in Lancaster County I had bought at an estate sale in 2014. I took 14 boxes of books. I took the Joni Mitchell CD. I left him the house. I left him the dining room set furniture. I left him the dining room set my mother had given us at our wedding, which I had hated for 32 years and which he had loved. I have not seen him since the day I drove out of the driveway in September. I have not, as of the date I am recording this story, exchanged a single text message with him. He has called 4 more times. I have not picked up. I do not need to. I have said what I needed to say. He heard what he was going to hear. There is nothing left to negotiate. I bought a small cottage in Bar Harbor in May. It is a 10-minute walk from Susannah's house. It is 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, with a small kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, and a back porch that faces a stand of birch trees. It has a view of the water if you stand on the porch and lean slightly to the left. The cottage was built in 1921. The floors are pine. The kitchen has a window over the sink. The window faces the birches. I have a small table by the window. I sit at the table in the morning with my coffee. I watch the birches change color in the wind. I have been doing this every morning for 4 months. I have not gotten tired of it yet. I have started writing again. I went into the storage unit I had rented for the boxes from the house in October. I found the manila folder from the bottom of the filing cabinet. I read the 3 chapters I had written in 1988. They were not as good as I had remembered. They were also not as bad as I had been afraid they would be. They were the work of a 26-year-old woman who had been trying to figure out how to put a sentence together. I have not, at 64, figured out how to put a sentence together. I have only figured out how to be honest in them. That, it turns out, is enough. I have been writing every morning for 2 hours. I am not writing the novel from 1988. I am writing something new. I do not know what it is yet. It is a collection of small pieces about the women in my family. My mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, who came from County Cork in 1908 with 2 trunks and a baby. Susannah. The piece I am working on right now is about my mother, who never left my father and who I loved with my whole heart, and who I have begun in the writing to forgive in a way I had not known I needed to. I have a friend now whose name is Magdalena. She is 71. She is a retired sculptor. She lives 3 doors down from my cottage. We met on the 2nd day I lived there, when I had been struggling to get a window unit air conditioner into a 2nd-story window by myself, and she had walked up the porch steps and said, "Pearl, stop. Let me help you. You are going to drop it on yourself." She had helped me. We had had iced tea on the porch afterward. She had told me in the next 90 minutes more about her life than I had told most of my friends in years. I had told her about Marcus. She had nodded. She had said, "Pearl, you are home now. I am not going to ask you to explain anything. I am only going to tell you that the women who land here, they all have a story. We do not require you to tell yours. We require only that you let us hold the door." I had cried at that. I do that now. I cry without apologizing. It turns out you are allowed to do that. The cardinal that visits my back porch came on the 1st day of October. I have not been able to figure out where his feeder is. He just comes. He sits on the porch railing. He looks at me through the window. He leaves. He comes back the next day. He has been coming for 11 days in a row. I have started leaving a small dish of seed on the porch railing. He approves. He brings a female now, sometimes. They have begun to come together. Magdalena says they are a couple. I do not know if birds have couples. I want to think so. The birds, like me, are not going back to where they came from. The birds are just here now. They eat the seed, they fly away, they come back. They do not have to explain themselves. Neither, anymore, do I. Theodore and Eleanor came to visit at Thanksgiving. Owen made a turkey. Susannah made stuffing. I made the casserole I had once left for Marcus, but I made it as a side dish this time, and I added more garlic, and I did not tell anyone where the recipe had come from. We ate at the long table in Susannah's dining room. There were 11 of us. Susannah's 2 daughters and their husbands, and Susannah's 3 grandchildren, and Owen's brother, and Magdalena and me and the kids. Theodore brought a bottle of wine and a small wrapped present. The present was a leather-bound journal. He had written on the inside cover in his careful handwriting, "Mom, for the new chapter, we love you, T and E." I had cried at the table. Eleanor had reached across and held my hand. She had said, "Mom, you are going to be okay. You are okay. You have always been okay, even when none of us could see it. We see you now." I want to tell you the part of this story that I have not been able to tell anyone except Susannah. I had thought for 32 years that when I finally left Marcus, the loss would be the marriage. It was not. The loss was the years. The loss was the woman I had been at 30, who had turned down the job in New York, who had moved to a small city in Pennsylvania for a man who had not asked her a question about a poem in 32 years. The loss was the novel that had stayed in a manila folder. The loss was the books I had not read because I had been making his dinner. The loss was the friends I had not kept because they had moved to other cities and I had not gotten on the plane. The loss was, in the end, all the small mornings I had given to a person who had not been giving them back. I have been mourning the years. I have been mourning the woman I had been at 30, the woman I had been at 40, the woman I had been at 50. They are gone. I cannot get them back. What I have been learning slowly in this cottage with the birches and the cardinal and Magdalena 3 doors down is that the woman I am now is not nothing. The woman I am now is 64. She has 20 years, maybe 30, of mornings still to come. The woman I am now can do whatever she wants with them. The woman I am now does not owe the lost ones an apology. She owes them only the work of making the new ones count. I am doing the work. I am doing it every morning. I am doing it badly sometimes. I am doing it well sometimes. I am doing it. That is the part that matters. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. Is there a poem you have been waiting to read out loud to someone who is not going to listen to it? Read it to yourself instead. Read it in your own kitchen, at your own table. Hear yourself. Listen. Then ask yourself, gently, with all the kindness you can find, whether you have been waiting for someone to listen to you who is not going to. If the answer is no, beautiful. If the answer is yes, I want you to know that there is a guest room somewhere. There is a sister, or a friend, or a woman 3 doors down who is going to walk up your steps when you are trying to lift a window unit by yourself. The room is being kept for you. It has been kept for you for a long time. It is okay to go to it. Drop a comment. Tell me what you have been carrying. I read every single one. I will see you in the next one. I will say one last thing to the women in their 50s and 60s who are listening to this and thinking that the time has passed. The time has not passed. The time is the time you have. The time is the rest of your mornings. The rest of your mornings can look like whatever you want them to look like. They can look like a birch tree out a window. They can look like a poem you read to yourself. They can look like a sister on a porch in Bar Harbor with a glass of butter-colored wine. The mornings are still coming. They are still yours. The mornings have been waiting for you. Go to them. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. Thank you for being here. I am so glad you came.